Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 7, episode 9. My name's Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week I'm talking to James, ex-US military and now a management consultant, actually on a break from his job to deal with misophonia. We talk about how it got really bad during the pandemic, living at one point in a college dorm janitorial closet, his coping methods when traveling, life in the military, working with Tom Dozier, and using drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. Really fascinating and wide-ranging conversation. After the show, let me know what you think. You can reach me, as always, by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. By the way, please head over and leave a quick review or rating wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps move us up in the algorithms, which gets us introduced to more listeners. A few of my usual announcements. Thanks for the incredible ongoing support of our Patreon supporters. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. And I want to mention the book Sounds Like Misophonia by Dr. Jane Gregory and I is being released in the UK September 14th, in a couple days now. It will be released in the US later this November. Sounds Like Misophonia is a self-help book on misophonia, the first one published by a major publisher. It's coming out by Bloomsbury Publishers. A lot of tips in there on how to deal with misophonia taken from Dr. Gregory's research and clinical practice. And there's a lot of information about what misophonia is and case studies that I helped organize and contribute into the book from actual misophones going through the exercises. This episode is also sponsored by my personal journaling app that I developed called Basil, B-A-S-A-L. Basil provides AI-powered insights into your journal entries and guides you with new writing prompts based on those insights. And you can explore different therapy approaches and philosophies. It's available on iOS or Android. Check the show notes or go to hellobasil.com. All right, now here's my conversation with James. James, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here, man. I've heard your voice so many times over the past few months, so it's good to see you in person.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear. Yeah, thanks for reaching out and everything, and I'm glad. Hopefully, things are helping a bit. So yeah, maybe. Well, actually, first, do you want to talk a little bit about where you are, kind of what you do?
Yeah. So currently in California, Southern California, I do management consulting, mostly for the federal government. So a lot of travel, and then I'm taking a break right now from work to sort of deal with the misophonia stuff. So a bit of inflection point in my life, I guess.
Yeah, did something happen a few months ago when you found out about the podcast?
Yeah. So it was kind of funny. I was working primarily remote in the pandemic, and then I would travel to client sites pretty infrequently. But I think in retrospect, I was kind of really feeling the misophonia kick up a lot in those experiences as well. But I had this project that was over in Europe, and I was jumping around from kind of country to country every week, staying in hotel rooms and traveling on airplanes. And I started to like really realize something was going on in that experience that was like kind of a next level of like anxiety and sleep deprivation and sort of all the I think experiences we get with misophonia. And I'd gotten back from that and was looking about, doing that travel pretty frequently. And I just couldn't do it. So yeah, I just kind of like, I'm sure you may have had similar experiences, but being in like these environments where you can't necessarily control what's going on around you in terms of like the sound profiles, and then repeating that day after day, it was just,
felt like a trap.
Yeah, definitely next level of trap. So I think it was just before that time I picked up your podcast and sort of like started to realize this was called something, and that other people had dealt with that, and I started to sort of reach out for help from that point. But yeah, so taking some time to sort of I guess address the underlying problem right now. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, well, it's good you're doing it and you recognize that. So was the pandemic something that kicked it up like next level? Can you identify anything in particular that changed?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
In some sense, like the pandemic was easier because it was, it was
Mm.
sort of, we're all like in our own environments
Yeah.
and separated from each other. And so those triggers were more manageable. But honestly, coming out of it, it probably
Yeah.
got more challenging, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did so going back, I guess, before the pandemic, was misophonia something that you obviously didn't know it had a name? You just found out that out recently. Was this like a lifelong thing that you remember?
100%. a
Yeah.
100%. And again, it's like I had no conscious awareness of it for years. But if I had to tag it, I'd say I was probably around 9 when it
Mm-hmm.
started. Um, and I remember these phases of my life where it was, more or less challenging throughout the years. But, in those experiences being younger, I didn't understand what was going on, I don't think. Um, so it's kind of like, I don't know, just kind of like tagged as like an angry kid or like a kid
Yeah.
with a lot of anxiety or something. But, in retrospect, I mean, I was getting these sort of like auditory triggers all the time and visual triggers that were sort of setting off this anxiety fear response.
How did was it at home where you had your first triggers, like around the dinner table kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I asked my mom about this the other day, um, and she has a distinct memory of us having to eat separately, like in separate rooms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Somewhere around the time I was 9 and after. Uh, so that was definitely an experience, and I remember, oh God, I remember being like a little kid, and our maid's son was, I can't remember exactly what he was doing, but there was some kind of like of that sort of trigger response, and I just remember beating the hell out of him as a little kid. Yeah, dude,
Yeah.
like putting him in the hospital.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was my only experience of it ever, like sort of like going beyond like
Mm-hmm.
into a physical manifestation of it. I mean, but those same thoughts and like occur to this day, where it's like, you want that thing to stop so badly that you get that sort of rage, sort of
Yeah.
violence response, right?
Fight or flight.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did yeah, I mean, well, I guess how did your family members deal with your reactions? I mean, they obviously let you eat separately, so there was some
Yeah.
kind of acknowledgement.
Yeah, there was that. My dad passed when I was 9, and I think that's when it really sort of
Mm,
heated up. And I don't, in reading a lot of like the research and stuff, it's unclear, but I think this sort of thing has to do with trauma to a degree, at least in my experience. Because when I sort of go through my history and then talk to people that I knew at that time, like I generally didn't have this problem before the age of 9. I don't think.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
then afterwards, it was like it really turned up. So yeah, eating separately was a thing. Sleeping situations have always been super challenging. Sleeping around people or dealing with sort of ambient noises in an environment, things like air
Mm-hmm.
conditioners, traffic noise. That's a killer. And so it's
Being able
always
to tune them out so that you
right,
can sleep. Yeah.
right. And so it's always been like a process of me like trying to control the environment and then reach out to people around me to like try to help me control it, and
Yeah.
participate in sort of like the collective insanity of the experience, which is
Yeah.
puts a lot of strain on relationships as well, I think.
Do you wear earplugs and do anything like that, or noise machines and things like that?
Yeah, so sort of another challenging thing that I experienced, I have tinnitus. I was in the military for a long time, so I got
Mm-hmm.
ringing in my ears constantly. So if I put earplugs in, it's like a whole different sort of hellish experience.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's generally not a great option for me. I have been experimenting with white noise, um, and yeah, different sort of ambient sounds to help drown it out. And I think for a long time I was trying to do that as well, but it's again, it's this like there's some element of like the disorder where it's like you're seeking out the sound
Mm-hmm.
in like a conscious way to try to control it. So it's almost like when I put stuff on top of it, I'm still looking for it.
Oh, you're seeking, yeah, heat
Yeah,
seeking. Yeah, right, right.
it's like it sort of like builds this like obsessive cycle. or something.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, because we've assigned danger, a threat level to it, and so we're trying to look for it in some ways. Yeah.
that's right.
Have you heard there was an episode I did with I think her name's Hazel. She has tinnitus too. She runs, I guess, the big tinnitus organization around the
Okay.
world. She has misophonia as well. She came on. That might be an interesting episode for you to listen
Yeah, I'll
to.
check that out. I'll take a note of it.
Um, so okay, cool. Um, yeah, and then well, how about, I mean, maybe sticking around around Charlotte, like, you were in school. Was it starting to affect like outside of the house, school, friends?
Yeah. I mean, high school, it wasn't, there was no, I was sort of living at home, so it was a little more controlled. But I think when I got off to
Yeah.
college, that's when I started to experience like the real challenges around mostly finding like a place where I could sleep, to be honest with you. Because I mean,
Mm,
you get those misophonic triggers during the day, and if you're well rested, I think that they can be more manageable, and you move
yeah.
away from them, even if you don't really understand what's going on. But it's super essential. Like, I mean, sleep is like sort of a baseline of our needs, and when it affects that, it becomes extremely challenging. I remember my first year at college, I was going to school up in LA, and was living in student housing, and the first place they put me in was like, I don't know if it was street noise or like the people sort of walking above me, but I just couldn't handle the sound profile.
Hmm.
Again, not understanding what was going on. I got them to move me into like the janitorial closet. It was like it was like a room, right? But it was like
Yeah.
not for living, but it was like placed in the right spot in the building where I wasn't going to get like sort of street noise or like people
Yeah.
above me. And I lived in this janitorial closet for a year.
Wow. It's like that Seinfeld episode where Elaine is living in a janitor closet to get Chinese food.
That's right. Yeah, no Chinese food involved, unfortunately. But I was able to sleep, so it was like such a
Yeah.
relief. But I mean, that's
Wow.
just like a perfect illustration of like the lengths that like
Yeah.
I'll go to regulate my nervous system sufficiently that I can like get good rest and function.
Hmm.
And it's been sort of like these cycles of that sort of story playing out over my life when I
Yeah.
look back. Um,
Did you talk to anybody about it? Like, I'm assuming your school, whatever, just said, assume that it was just some weird idiosyncrasy.
yeah.
Did you ever run into anyone else who had a similar issue and maybe try to work it out with you?
No, no, not
Yeah.
specifically. It was like, it was really, again, like just the past maybe 6 or 7 months, I've really identified what the actual
Yeah.
problem
How
is.
did you do that? How did you identify what it was?
It was listening to your podcast was a huge part of it. I think I had started to join some Facebook groups where I
Mm,
heard of this thing before, and
yeah.
I knew there
Yeah.
was something going on with noise.
Right.
And then I started to identify with the folks that you were having on. I was like, oh my God, dude, this is what I have. Like, this is exactly what it is. And it was like, I mean, I think like the first step of any problem is like identifying it, right? Calling it out,
Yeah.
bringing it into conscious awareness, giving it a name. So that, I mean, it's a more powerful place to operate from than I have been in the past because it gives
Hmm.
me sort of a baseline to, how to deal with something. But no, for years it was unnamed, and it was, I'd been in and out of sort of like therapy and like taking psych meds for anxiety, depression, sleep, all those kind of things. And I think all of those problems have really sat on top of this more fundamental thing.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, I'm sure it's not in the DSM here in the States. It's not
Right.
very well understood phenomenon at all. So there's not really any resources for it.
Right.
So I think I talked in a general way about like my anxiety and depression and problems with sleep, but not about misophonia specifically. No,
Do you remember ever mentioning sound and having a discussion about that with a therapist?
not maybe not until over probably a year ago. Yeah, probably a year ago is when the first time I addressed it. I bought this house out in Texas because I had spent some time living there, and unfortunately, I bought it too close to an airport. It was like 20 minutes outside, but
Yeah.
I didn't really sort of like study the flight paths before.
Right.
The first night I'm sleeping there, I'm hearing these 747s sort of take off and land maybe
Yeah.
20,000 feet above. And it was just like, I was like, oh my God, can't do this. So it was like,
Yeah.
I think it was that. So I had to move out of this house that I just bought and then go on this sort of, project slash trip where I was like getting the sound thing in my face constantly. And like, by the time I got from the trip, I'm like, oh my God, dude, something is going on
Mm.
here. Like
Hmm.
this is the specific problem. And so that's when it kind of all sort of
Yeah.
formed.
Yeah. I'm curious. I mean, you said you were in the military. Was there any difference during that period? Because obviously there's sounds you can't control,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then there's maybe I don't know, maybe there's a cultural thing too. It's not like something you maybe want to bring up with everybody because there's
Yeah.
bigger problems,
It
bigger
was,
fish to fry.
yeah, no, it was pure hell looking back. And I have no idea how I got through it because, I mean, you're surrounded by, a few hundred people all day long in communal living environments. And I didn't obviously didn't know what was going on at the time, but I was like, oh my God, in like the deepest state of anxiety and fear
Hmm.
from this thing and just constantly sleep deprived. I remember going through training cycles and being in these open bays with like 100 people and like people have, they're turning the lights off and on and people are snoring and, being people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Like normal and regular and like should not be a big deal. But, my mind interprets all these sort of sensory, auditory
Yeah.
and visual inputs in this way. And I just remember like being in my bunk at night, like up to like 3:34 in the morning and then getting a couple hours of sleep and having to function all day in that
Right. Right.
environment. And I remember being
Right.
like sitting on the floor, like totally exhausted, like almost like ready to pass out. And like, I think one of my buddies was like, what is wrong with you? He's like, looking at me, he's like, is there something wrong with you? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm always exhausted. Like, I feel like I'm about to panic all the time. And like, I mean, in those situations, you just keep pushing, right? You just push through,
Yeah.
push through it, push through it. And it's not, the brass tacks of the job aren't complicated or difficult. So you can sort of do it on autopilot, but it's,
Mm.
the experience was quite overwhelming at the time.
Gotcha.
And then, the other thing about the military is you can't get out, right? So like, you're in and you're going to deal with whatever situation you're put in for as long as you need to. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That sounds like yeah. It sounds like a um, yeah, an unusual place for someone with misophonia, or a
yeah, not the
challenging place for
best,
sure.
not the best.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe rewarding in other ways, but yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
that's right.
So when you got out of it, was it just? Did you get any? I don't know. Did you Did you get out as a kind of a normal way out, or was it? Did you try to get out early?
Yeah,
Because
so no, yeah, fulfilled the contract and
you just
everything.
fulfilled it. Yeah, yeah, cool.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I'm sort of like have the military mindset by nature. I'd always wanted to be in the military and,
Mm,
I wanted to do a long-term career, but, unfortunately got an injury.
mm,
And in retrospect, if I really think back, the injury was really caused in sort of a tertiary way by misophonia. I would run all the time. It was like, obviously like they want you to be physically fit, but I was really excessive about it. And I'd run maybe 12, 15 miles a day. Um,
wow.
and you run on like these sort of asphalt sort of surfaces, and what
Yeah.
that does over time is it breaks down your knees and your lower back. And
Mm,
I just got to the point where I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't wear gear. So yeah, a couple of back injuries and knee injuries, and that I think that running behavior I was really trying to regulate like the whole experience, right? Because you get
mm-hmm.
that sort of endorphin rush and like you feel good and it
Yep.
exhausts you, and I'm like, okay, here's something I can go to that makes me feel good, right? Whether I slept
Right.
well or I'm having like all this stuff going on in my head, and over time it just broke my body down. So it wasn't a sustainable career long term, aside
Mm,
from the fact that the misophonia was going on. So
yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So you got out. And so yeah, maybe talking about like workforce. Did you go right into the workforce, management consulting, or back to school or at all?
yeah, I went back to school,
Yeah.
got my MBA, and ended up working in defense contracting for a year, and then on to management consulting, which I've been doing since then.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm trying to think in terms of workforce, all sort of the standard experiences I've heard on the podcast. Like clicking keyboards.
lunchroom,
Oh my
clicking keyboards.
yeah, and then like coworkers, chewing, and then you
Yep.
can't get away from the source.
Right.
And yeah, so yeah, very challenging. In some sense, of a lot of the consulting work I've done has been sort of remote, so it's made it easier. But every time you go on client side, it's a whole experience because you got to deal with the travel piece and then being in a facility and
Right.
so.
Right. Gotcha. So, yeah. So then, what do you day to day tools like? I'm assuming like for traveling, you've got the headphones or earbuds or something going on. What are
Yeah,
other?
yeah, I got the AirPod Pros,
Yep.
and I've always listened to music all day long, and part of it's because I like music, right? But
Yep.
when I look back, it's because I've been trying to avoid sounds for sure.
Right.
Um, so that's been helpful. And then what are some other tools? I mean, I've picked up quite a toolkit in the past couple of months, which we can go into. I don't know if we want to go into that yet, but
Yeah. Yeah. We might as well. Yeah.
okay,
Let's
yeah.
hear about it.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess the other thing is like sort of like muscle relaxation.
Yeah. Okay.
That's like a big one, like progressive muscle relaxation. I'll think about like sort of like what works for me is like my jaw, like relaxing my jaw. Like I'll tell myself that and sort of like consciously like relax your jaw, and then I watch it relax and like feel like the muscles around my eyes. And then like I'll breathe sort of deeply as low as I can and then out. And somehow that like sort of recenters that impulsive response or reflex. I mean, it's not 100%, right? But maybe
Yeah.
it grade eights at 5, 10%, which is something.
Right. Right.
So that the white noise. I mean, a big thing traditionally is just avoidance, right? If I can get away from the sound, I
Yeah.
will.
Yep.
Um,
Do you do that that progress relaxation like I'll tell a lot of people that I self-soothe or talk to myself and tell myself that I'm not under threat like before I enter a situation. Is that these are these kinds of things you would do like it'd be I'm assuming it'd be hard to do right in the middle of a trigger. This is probably like things you would do in advance, maybe in the morning or something.
yeah, yeah. No, it is hard to do when you're getting triggered, and it's like when you're in the situation where you can't escape the trigger. I think like an airplane's a good example, right? It's like and then you get into that sort of fear reactive mind state where your sort of prefrontal cortex is not online. It's like how do you tap into that, And I think like you got to sort of train the habits prior to consistently, which
Yeah.
I've not been the best at. Not been the best at. But they do exist, and when I do pick up those tools, like I said, it doesn't change it, but it does. Maybe the sort of like the cascade of emotions and that physical response becomes just a little shorter or a little less intense.
Or like get like kind of like meaner version in finance. You can get
Right,
back to
right, right,
equilibrium a little bit better. Yeah,
right,
a
right.
little bit faster,
Yeah, yeah.
less of an oscillation.
The problem is I talk to my therapist all the time. It's like if you're in a situation where it's like you get re-trigger, like your
Yeah,
ability to regulate between the triggers becomes less and less, and then you get
right.
into this cycle. And it's yeah. So I mean, man, if I can avoid a sound or get away from it, like it gives me the space to sort of come back into it because
Yeah.
I mean, exposure in my experience, and then talking to some folks who are maybe more expert than me is like not the solution, right? Like
Oh,
this,
special therapy? No,
yeah,
yeah, it tends to be frowned upon.
yeah, uh,
I think it works for things like OCD, and if you get a therapist who just assumes it's that, then that's what they'll give you. But yeah, I think there are other things that work better for misophonia. Yeah, I mean, what about in terms of how it's affected social life, relationships, things like that?
yeah, devastating, man, totally
Yeah.
devastating. Um, like in a fundamental way, it's like the problem is that people and the things that people do trigger that response. So I want to avoid people, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you iterate that over a whole lifetime. Like, I mean, isolation is not great for you. You know, it's not what we're supposed to be doing, and
Yeah.
that's where I tend to navigate to because of the challenges around this condition. Um, so it's been extremely limiting and devastating in a fundamental way over my life, and then all the I have a history of sort of drug and alcohol use and abuse, and I've been sort of clean and sober for several years now. But when I look back, what the reason I was drinking and using was to regulate that
Self-medicate?
Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
100%. And, I remember being in a college dorm, maybe like the next year after what we were talking about, and my roommate's air conditioner and the remover was setting me off. Like, I don't know. I didn't know what was going on, but I was obsessing about it. I was like talking to my roommate about turning off his air conditioner. He's like, "You're crazy." And I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
"I guess I am. I don't know."
Yeah.
But I would pick up a muscle relaxer or like some kind of pill or a drink to nod off
Mm.
sleep and like turn the anxiety level down, and that turned into a real progressive problem real quick.
Wow.
And for
Yeah. Yeah.
years, I used drugs and alcohol to medicate that anxiety response. Um, so yeah, and then obviously that was socially challenging for all the reasons that drug and
Yeah.
alcohol abuse are for everyone else. Um, so that, and then the misophonia itself have been driven me to sort of social isolation as much as possible. Now that I'm aware of it, I can see it, when it's happening, and sort of like maybe navigate a bit better, but it's still challenging today.
What about your family members now? I'm just curious, kind of, are they aware now of that misophonia exists? Oh, you said you were talking to your mom about it recently. I'm curious, other than that, that the kid you beat up, has it kind of affected relationships with like family members or people from your childhood and maybe driven a wedge or maybe brought you closer again now that you know what it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. Definitely driven a wedge in terms of, I mean, grew up single child, single mother. So over the years, it was challenging
Ah,
in terms of
right.
like navigating that relationship and trying to, you know, basically constantly request that, she stop doing certain things, right?
Yeah.
Which are normal things. And ooh, she's a professional musician, a
Wow.
pianist, and sort of a savant and like an amazing sort of musician. And the piano sort of like sets me off and gives me this anxiety experience.
Really?
Like,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
she wants to play, I got to be sort of out of the house.
Really?
And
Okay.
yeah, so like, I mean, that's just one example, but it could be, obviously the traditional stuff, eating,
Yeah.
sort of all those noises. But yeah, it's constantly this battle of like, okay, I'm having this um, response to this trigger and it's giving me anxiety and I can't quote unquote deal with it. And so I want to control that person's behavior. Right. And
Yeah.
I think really just in the past couple of weeks, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I got to stop trying to control other people's behavior. You know, like that's not the answer.
It's not a
And it's
sustainable
not.
hope. Yeah.
No, it's not. No, but like in that moment, you want to escape it so badly.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so it's like, okay, like then the question becomes like, okay, what can I do? Okay, like I can move away from this thing, right? I can get
Right.
out of the house or go to another room. I can put the sort of white noise in. I can sort of do these progressive muscle relaxation, deep breathing exercises. But yeah, so this is when I said inflection point earlier. That's kind of where I'm at. It's like, how do I operate in the world without trying to control everyone and everything all the time?
Yeah. Right. 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 Well, I mean, like you said, it is a first step. It's got to be. It's kind of a revolutionary moment. I mean, at least there's some. You're not alone. Other people are going through the same questions, and so
Right.
hopefully we can kind of figure it out, or at least I don't know. It just kind of helps to know that when I'm being triggered, I'm probably not the only. I'm definitely not the only one in that moment who's dealing with this, and there's that I'm reminded that it is a construct in my mind or my body, and so um, if I can whatever I can tell myself to kind of tell my brain that I'm not in threat. Whatever I can remind myself because that seems to be the crux of it. If I can kind of somehow convince my body that I'm not under threat, um, it really helps the situation. That's why, weirdly, making jokes about it in a tasteful way can really
Mm,
reduce the threat level as well.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas humor is a good coping mechanism. Um, when I can't stick headphones on.
right.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Have you met? I guess in the short months that you've known what it is, have met anyone or maybe thought back, hey, that person from my past, whether it was in the military or school, may have had misophonia.
It's a good question. I'll it's funny. I'll walk around kind of all day thinking about like, I read some literature like something like 1 in 5 people have this to some degree or
Mm-hmm.
something. There's a significant percentage, whether it's 10% or 20% or something, or even 5%. I'll think like, man, is this person being affected right now?
Right,
And I'll kind
right,
of be
right.
looking for it. And I remember I was in the gym maybe a few months ago, and I was
Gym's a
sort of,
tough place.
it was a tough spot,
Oh yeah,
very tough spot.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and I had my music playing on my phone, without my earphones in. And this guy made some sort of like, comment, that was like off the cuff, kind of like, I was like, didn't say anything except for something negative about my music being on, right? And I was like, I felt like very angry. I was like, what? I don't know you, dude.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, that guy probably has misophonia, you know? Like, I
Could
know what
be.
that is,
Yeah,
like that uncontrollable reaction where like you have some
yeah.
rage and some sort of like
Right,
auditory input. And then I was
right.
like, huh, you know? Um, so I'm trying to think of the folks around me in my close relationships. I don't think so. I think my mother might have it to a degree.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I remember sitting at like dinner and someone had like sort of whistly S's in the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
conversation behind us. And she was like, she put her hands over her ears and said,
Mm.
God, that woman's S's are like, I can't deal with it.
Yeah, yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, that's misophonia, you know?
I'm curious, what kind of music do you listen to? Like, is it like piano and just not your mom's, or is it
Yeah,
completely
good
different?
question. Yeah, I listen to, funny, yeah, she's like a classical, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
musician. I do not listen to any of that. No, I listen
yeah.
to electronic music and
Hmm.
country and rock and
Yeah,
all the stuff that she does not want to listen to. And,
gotcha.
yeah, that does not trigger me. So,
Yeah,
I think it's very context dependent too, man. It's like, I think I've heard you
right.
talk about this before too. I might listen to a, a certain sound profile in a given context, and then if it switches the context, all of a sudden that becomes a trigger.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, right. If your mom is triggering you, the same another person doing the same thing might not necessarily do that.
right.
Um, yeah, that's definitely the case. Do you have so now that you've yeah, I'm curious, is there anything that you've been reading that's been particularly interesting that you haven't tried yet? I don't know, that therapies that sound interesting or
Yeah, so I guess I'll just sort of
modalities.
jump into the big thing that I reached
Yeah.
out to you about.
Yep.
I picked up this book. I don't know. So interestingly enough, I had gone to see a audiologist to sort of deal with, tinnitus, um, and he had directed me to, um, this guy Tom Dozier, who I've been working with for, a while, and he wrote a book called Understanding, and Overcoming Misophonia. Um, it's called "Does the Sound of Others Chewing Fill You with Rage?" And I got his book and I started reading it, and I was like, oh wow,
Yeah, Tom Dozier's been on the podcast kind of early on. I've
yeah,
met him
yeah,
at the convention. He's definitely yeah, he's definitely a well-known figure
yeah,
in the
yeah, for
community.
sure. And I've been working with him on a weekly basis since I picked up his book and sort
Yeah.
of gone through his process. And, yeah, something has been shifting. Um,
Okay.
it's not 100% at all. It's not even 90%.
Yeah.
But, uh, yeah, I've experienced sort of something happening. Um, and I mean, basically, I don't want to muck it up by being non-scientific about it, but there's this app that he's got, called the Trigger Tamer app.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I've heard of that.
Yeah. And basically, like, I'll put these earbuds in and listen to these triggers that are traditional triggers like chewing or
Mm-hmm.
dogs barking or whatnot, and I'll see a reflex when I play them at a significant volume. So like the idea is you have like this physical reflex within your body, and at first it was hard to pinpoint where it was at. I think we
Right.
thought it was like my breathing response at first, but then it turned out to be this sort of like this jerk in my chest and
Mm-hmm.
shoulder. My
Mm-hmm.
shoulder would go up, and my chest muscle sort of like freezes up like that. And then as soon as the trigger's gone, it will release. And if you trigger the sound again, it goes. It's
Yeah.
like this physical reflex. I think the idea is if you break the physical reflex, the emotional response will dissipate or become significantly more manageable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing it. I can see the reflex happen every time. It's like clockwork. And then when I bring that same trigger to a sufficiently low volume, it'll lessen and then it'll go away. And then I work with that sound progressively. So like I bring it from say 1% to 5% to 10 to 20 to 100,
Right.
150. And over, a period of 8 hours, maybe a few cycles of 8 hours, that response goes away. And then when I
Mm.
hear that sound again, not only is the physical reflex there, but the emotional response is not there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is like amazing. So like I'll be listening to like dog barks, like totally get me. And my neighbors have dogs,
Yeah.
and I'll listen to the trigger tamer app, sort of cycle through it, and then all of a sudden I'll be sitting in my backyard and a dog will be barking, and I'll be having a conversation. And like I think I was talking to my mom the other day, and she's like, that didn't bother you, and I was like, whoa, that's amazing,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, right now I'm in this phase where I got my earbuds in all the time, and I'm listening to everything that triggers me all day long,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to sort of decondition that physical reflex and hopefully the emotional response. So I mean, it seems to be working. It's just it just takes time. It's taking time.
Interesting, yeah, because one of the things people say about um, Tom Dozier's approach is it's a bit like exposure therapy, where it's just trying to kind of like build you up and get you used to something, um, and then people kind of debate, which comes first, is it physical or is it emotional, causing the reaction, and so
Yeah.
it's interesting
Okay.
to hear. It's interesting to hear your experience here.
Yeah. So two things on that. It is not exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is not helpful, and I think that he says the exact same thing.
Yeah,
It's got to be to this like sufficiently low level that you're. It sort of he talks about like the lizard brain, right? Like the brain
yeah,
stem,
yeah,
this
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
in response where it goes into your amygdala and just sort of like there you go. And if you can get it to unlearn that reaction at a sufficiently low level, then
Yeah.
it sort of like it's like a predictive mechanism. So then
Mhm.
okay, so it goes okay at a 1% volume, you did not have this reflex, so that gets banked into the historical sort of apparatus, and then
Yeah.
now next time at the 2% volume, you're less likely to have it. And so if you work your way up over time, it learns that that's not a threat,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm.
And it's a bit challenging because it's like I don't know, it's sort of like RAM on a computer or like a memory bank. So it's got all these experiences over the years of predicting
Yeah.
a sort of trigger as a threat, and so it'll bank that along with all that historical experiences. So the next time you
Right.
approach one of these triggers, you may be able to go at a 15, 20, 25%, but if you go back to 75%, you're going to get triggered again. So it's a bit of like a stair step. One
Mhm.
session you might get up to 25%, and the next session you might have to start back down at 15.
Yeah.
But the
Interesting.
hope is over time, if you keep doing it, you can hear this out in reality at a full volume and not have the response. And I'm starting to get that experience. I did it with sort of dog barking. That was the first one. And then I did airplane sort of takeoff
Mhm.
and landings. And so I'll try to
Yeah.
catch different profiles of these and like record them on YouTube with different sort of like plane engines. And it's sort of very obsessive process that I'm in, but it seems to be
Yeah.
doing something. Um,
Or does the app come with a bunch of
yeah. So he's got a baseline of samples, maybe like I'm trying to look at it right now. It's like maybe like 20 or 30 kind of standard samples. So it's Let me pull it up. Yeah, so have like airplane, dog barking, chip crunching,
Yeah,
bass
classics.
sounds, all the classic ones. And then the idea is you can sort of tag off those, and then you would maybe catch 5 to 6 different profiles of similar sounds. And you work with the primary, secondary, up to 5 of them, and then sort of cycle through them. And then maybe over a period of 8, 16, 32 hours, like all of a sudden this response in the actual environment is lowered. And it's not to say that it goes away entirely. Like, I mean, I think a dog barking is annoying to everyone, but it becomes this thing where it's like, okay, this is a normal response as opposed to this hyper vigilant
Gotcha.
reactive response.
Interesting. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm be curious to see how that all works out.
Yeah, me too.
Um, Very cool. Yeah, I'm curious. Do you have any? Yeah, do you have anything else you kind of want to share with people who are listening? It's really interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people listening like you who are learning about it through the podcast. So, um, your experiences are definitely going to help a lot of people. Anything you kind of want to share?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would just say
We
that,
covered a lot, so
yeah, we sure
but,
did. We sure did. I guess I'd like to first thank you for your podcast and putting
oh,
this
of course, you're welcome.
information and these real conversations about it out there, because it's certainly been eye opening for me and sort of helped me on my journey. So thank you so much for that. And then
Actually, that reminds me. Is there? I'm also curious. Like, is there anything that I should be asking other people more about? Is there anything
uh,
that you're kind of curious about?
I mean, you do a pretty in depth job. I don't think there's
It's
anything.
very free form. Like, I don't even look at my
Yeah,
notes anymore. So,
yeah, no,
um,
no, you're good. No, I appreciate like the authenticity of it. I think a lot of a lot of things I listen to in media or podcasts can be very structured and sort of like have
right.
an agenda. And I think the fact that you're purely exploratory is probably the most helpful. So I think you're right on point. I really appreciate that. Yeah, but I would just say like I don't know this. In my personal experience, this thing feels like quite a mountain to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there's things you can do. You know. And there's tools that are out there. So I would just say for anyone who's listening, who's sort of going through a similar challenging experience with this, it's like, there are resources and there are actions that you can take. So, I mean, as devastating as it can feel in the moment, I think that there is a way out to a more manageable sort of relationship with the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no cure, but there seems to be a lot of tools that you have to find your. I mean, there's a lot of common things, obviously, like sleep and lower your stress level. I mean, one of the common things, actually, one of the common things that I've learned about through the podcast, as I'm sure you've heard, is that kind of early childhood um, traumatic experience of some sort. I'm curious if I don't know if you've noticed any. I'm not going to get into the whatever you talk about with your therapist, but I'm sure it's probably come that your situation, your past experiences have come up. I'm just curious if you've been able to somehow, I don't know, connect any dots other than the chronological dot to kind of what happened.
100%. Yeah, I'm happy to share about it. Yeah, I mean, when I was 9, my dad passed, and it was I have this distinct memory of like the experience in the day, and like sort of, I kind of knew it was coming.
Hmm.
I was sort of sitting on this couch in our family room, and I, heard the phone call, and sort of like I was like, okay, it happened. And I remember afterwards, sort of like this like physical like shutdown in my body,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
being very numb, and it was like that for a while. I think it was like, trauma response, sort of like protective mechanism, and I mean that was when I was 9, and then after that, misophonia started. That's when it started. And I talked to the people around me. They were like, "You did not have this situation go on before," and then after that date, it did. So I mean,
Yeah.
from my experience, it's definitely a trauma response. I'm sure it can be sort of different for different folks, but
Or
yeah,
something was imprinted in your brain. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And so I think it's important to just for other people to hear about who've gone through similar things
yeah,
because I've heard about it. Whether it's a parent or a loved grandparent or something. It's in some cases it is like an on and off switch, and it just turned on after that. Um,
yeah. That was definitely
so
my experience. So yeah, I think that's probably the general pattern if I had to extrapolate out.
yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Um, well, cool. Yeah, James. It's been a fascinating conversation, wide ranging in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah,
But no, thanks again for reaching out, and it's great to hear about your background, and feel free to reach out anytime.
I will. I really appreciate you putting on a deal. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you again, James. And good luck with the rest of your miso sabbatical. I hope things continue to improve in a lasting way. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars. Wherever you listen to this podcast, you can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast. Follow there, or on Facebook, and on Twitter/X, it's Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.